Hi, friends. Welcome again to another episode of Beyond the Clouds, Edge to Edge Transformation. And transformation has been going on for some time. It's very commonly believed that AI started with ChatGPT and Gen AI, which is not quite accurate. Remember Watson and how it challenged Jeopardy, chess, and Go? Well, we have one of the heroes who has been working on these kinds of technologies at IBM. Sandeep, tell us your story. How did you become the guy behind many of these technologies and what inspired you? Were you always one of those guys on the cutting edge?
Thank you, Shankar. I've always had the bigger picture in mind. My undergrad project was in optimizing distillation columns. There was a company which said, hey, I don't think our distillation columns are working very well. We are supposed to get X amount of extract from sugar canes, but we're not getting the kind of the sugar that we really expect out of this one. So can you come take a look at it? And like a typical engineer, you step in, you collect all the data, and you see, is there information that's missing, or is there data that's missing? Or is it really people being very careless in terms of what they're doing to extract this one? And what I learned very quickly is that it's not as much about the distillation columns as it was about the farmers and the need for them to really have some money in their bank to feed their families and everything else. And often they end up harvesting the sugar cane much before it's ready. So the majority of the sugar in the sugar cane, forms towards the latter stage when it gets mature. So my recommendation to the owner was, why don't you just purchase ahead of time, let the farmers have some money, let them harvest later so that you can improve the productivity of it. So it had very little to do with what we could do in terms of turning the knobs and optimizing the distillation column, as it had more to do with the fact that we needed to look at the complete ecosystem. So when we talk about AI in particular, when I first started working in AI, I started working in the area of handwriting recognition, where machine print recognition was kind of well addressed. We even had fonts which were designed for machine print. And most of the people back in the early 90s were using the machine print software to recognize handwriting. And obviously, they were doing very, very poorly. Being in research and having some of the most amazing colleagues that I've always had, I had the opportunity to take a step back. Typically, if you look at handwriting, it's contour-based. It's not print-based, it's contour-based. And if you observe very closely, the places where characters connect with other characters, you see a significant change in contours when they're interconnected. So rather than splitting the characters, I said, can we separate the characters, see if we can improve the recognition? And when we started separating the characters and recognizing it, we were able to get 20% better than everyone else. We won several NIST competitions in handwriting recognition. We were the only company back in the day to qualify for recognizing tax forms with IRS. So we won the IRS contract, then we won several state tax forms and everything else, which led me to working on address recognition in Europe and then US and quite a bit. So I was working in the space of artificial intelligence for a long period of time. As I was doing that within IBM, we saw a lot of progress. Within research, we typically tend to have CEO challenges, the grand challenges. One of the tasks that we had is that can we really develop a computer system that can beat the best brain in chess? So we developed Deep Blue as a way to demonstrate that computers can do a pretty good job of determining what the best next move is, and it demonstrated by beating Kasparov. There was a significant concern back in the day. Oh my God, look at IBM, now it can beat the best brain in it. But then they also noticed that it's a very limited domain. So the next big challenge we had within IBM was, all right, the next most intellectual game that people tend to play was Jeopardy, where you have lots of random categories, and within those categories, you have quote unquote lots of different answers for which you have to formulate the question. Very, very difficult thing to do. And we took on that task and we defeated the best brains in Jeopardy back in the day. And people suddenly said, oh my God, look at that. This is super awesome as well. But then they realized that this was data, a lot of data that was curated, and we managed to create a solution for it, but it was not something that we were learning from the internet. So if you look at the whole notion of education, and in particular, how we are advancing as a human race, is that we tend to learn from information that we get from other cultures and other sources. And back in the day, you had to travel from one place to another place to gather information, learn about different societies and their understanding of mathematics and science and geography and philosophy and everything else. If we as kids wanted to learn, we had to always go to the library, check out books, read other people's writings and everything else. For me, this was an example that I always used to give to my own kids, Shankar, that when we were kids, while information was accessible, it wasn't really accessible until the weekends, where we had to go to the libraries and check out the books. The information that they had by having smartphones, information on their fingertips, was something that I was always envious about. If only I had that kind of information while I was growing up. So that changed everything. Now think about what's happening with Gen AI. We have gotten to a point like the Googles of the world and OpenAI and Microsoft and IBM. We can learn a lot from the information that's available on the internet. There are a lot of people who have accomplished a lot of things around the globe, and we can learn from it. And is there a way we can translate that information to the end user in a proper syntactical manner? And that's really where we are at the moment. We have learned a lot of information from the internet. Now, there is still a lot more information that's hidden behind the paywalls. If you look at things like New York Times, like really rich internet content, really good textual content, language content, the books where people tend to write their understanding of the world and everything else, the editorials in the press and everything else. So the next step of evolution of Gen AI is really going to be crossing that chasm to really learn more in terms of what we can do to help benefit the human race.
This is great. You gave me a full perspective of what motivated you and where we stand today. And as I talk to experts on many different topics, one of the things they say Gen AI is going to do is break silos. Obstetrician, gynecologist knows this, and a neuroscientist knows this, and a neurosurgeon knows something else. Design engineer knows something, data scientist knows something. We have siloed our information too much. Do you think there is hope that with the newer tools that are emerging, that there will be much better integration between silos, and what kind of knowledge base are we going to create with this new paradigm shift?
We can kind of break this down into the multiple layers of the networking, for example, level 0, level 1, level 2, and so on. There is information that's available today, which would help understand the different domains. One of the very first learnings that we had back in the day, a patient can go to a physician and the physician prescribes a bunch of medicines. On the next visit, the patient goes back. The expert physician doesn't see any change. The patient shrugs their shoulder and says, it's not working. So then the doctor prescribes some other medicine. And what we learned very quickly by breaking the silos, Shankar, is that many of these patients were not even prescribed purchasing the drugs. You get the prescription, people have the stigma about taking medicines, so they really don't go and buy the medicines. And instead, they're going back to the doctor and saying, hey, I've been taking the medicine that you prescribed and it's not helping. So that was the first silo that people broke. There are bigger things here in terms of the ecosystem. The current medical equipment that we have, is it really providing the right amount of insights that a physician needs to diagnose what the problem is? Is it enough to just take a selfie and say, hey, there's a possibility that you have skin cancer? Do we really have the evolution of the hardware that helps the software do a better job of diagnosis, even before going into multimodal analysis of any of this data? You've got your sensors, you've got your data, you've got your domain experts, you can do it. The thing that I like the most is that if you talk to any of the surgeons, they will always have one or two stories where they were almost superhuman in bringing together all of their learnings, where everything kind of clicks, so that they could help the patient from this incredible trauma that they're going through and recover from it. The breakdown of the silos is obvious. If people have been working in their little caves, in their own cocoons, developing their own shiny pearl, you can always have that. But when you string together all of these pearls together, you may end up having this beautiful necklace that enhances the beauty of what you're trying to solve quite tremendously.
That's wonderful. So going from individual pearls to full necklaces, that's an amazing metaphor, and I can visualize it. Are we now moving from the days of solving chess or solving Jeopardy to general artificial intelligence?
We are progressing towards that. At the moment, the learnings are from past data, from census. People have articulated what they think is the best solution for a particular problem. This really breaks down the silos to get started. For example, if you're trying to discover a new drug, or if you're trying to discover, let's say, a new material, a lot of the human race is dependent upon natural resources right now, whether it is oil, gas, whether it is silicon, whether it is nickel, cadmium. Pretty soon we're going to run out of these natural resources. But do we have a way we could use AI to create this next generation data or material that helps solve our needs to survive on this particular planet? From a research point of view, I see a huge opportunity in terms of learnings from the past to create the future. In terms of education, there are certain basic things. How do you communicate with one another? How do you write a good letter? How do you reason a particular problem? So these are the kind of things that the existing AI can help solve. In the future, with the learnings that you have, what can we do next? I'll give you a very simple example. Like, hey, I've inherited this property or I purchased this property, let's say on Highway 1 on Carmel. I want to build a home on that. What's really involved in building a home in Carmel? You're right on the Pacific Ocean. You're on the fault line. So what kind of foundation do you need to build a home that's sturdy there? You're going to get a lot of sunlight. There's a lot of UV. So what kind of windows do you need? And there's going to be a lot of ocean air. What kind of nuts and bolts do you need to make sure that they don't corrode? So these are information that you can benefit from the existing information that's there without having to hire specialists in material science, a specialist in glass, specialists in foundation models and things like that. This is information that is very useful if you're an architect, if you're a builder, in developing or building the best solution out there. If you're building bridges, same thing. You want to be able to learn from whatever information that's there to create the right amount of strength that you need to have in that particular space. But if you think about it, in the future, if you want to create a material that's biodegradable, if you're thinking about a material that is not scarce, that a material that can survive hundreds of years, how do we go about developing those materials? And that's the future that we really look forward to. Or developing new sensors which can capture the kind of information that we need to capture to be able to do better diagnosis. So it doesn't matter which domain you're in, whether you're a material scientist, whether you're a physician, whether you're a mathematician. The question is there enough information that you can gather from all of these different sources so that you can better yourself to create a better solution in the future?
One question every day in the news now, we hear about ChatGPT. In fact, there are music and songs made around ChatGPT, for instance. But we also know that that's not it. But if you were to believe, if you were to look at the person on the street, they would think it's between ChatGPT and Google Bard, everything is done. IBM has been around in this field of AI for a much longer time. Where are you folks going? I know you don't sell to consumers per se, but where is IBM focusing on? And what are the strides you've made in the recent past?
A very good question. IBM, for the longest time, the reason we did not enter the space of the Google or Yahoo or Alta Vistas of the world had primarily to do with the fact that we respected people's data as people's data. We did not want to intrude the privacy of other people and what they were doing. So we never entered the space of search, not because we couldn't. If you look at a majority of the scientists that are out there in the Valley, most of them are ex-IBMers, including the head of Google Research. So our world has always been that we have always said customer data is customer data. If you have rights of the data, then it's your data. We did not want to get into that particular space. Since then, the world's evolved quite a bit. Many of the companies have terms of use of the data. They have robots to TXT, which determines what you can learn from and what you cannot learn on their websites. As long as you're being respectful of all of these things, you can do quite a bit in terms of understanding what it is. In terms of what IBM's doing, of course, we have our own Gen AI models applied to the various applications. I'll give you a couple of examples that are happening just within my group that could help in terms of understanding. If you look at industry applications in particular, I'm really concerned about the amount of emissions that we as humans are creating on this world. And you look at, okay, what are the biggest polluters? You have polluter number one, The creation of cement and concrete potentially creates a lot of emissions and greenhouse gases, and this is something which is a significant concern. So what is it that we can do to change the mixture of the concrete to get better ones? The second thing is that so many vehicles on the road and we all use tires. The most significant polluter is from the tires, especially as the tires get eroded, then they start emitting a lot of material into the atmosphere, which is bad for us. We can go further into details in terms of, hey, we have way too much nitrous oxide in the air, and that could cause neurological disorders in people, especially kids. How do we tackle some of those things? You look at high pollution cities like Beijing or Delhi, that could lead to really bad medical conditions for little kids growing up in those towns. We could look at more short-term things like I'm traveling a very long distance, I'm exhausted, I'm willing to upgrade my ticket from economy to business class. I'm willing to pay. The airlines want to make more money. They certainly do not want to fly with empty seats. So what is the common ground that you can possibly have in terms of that? Can the airline have enough information about you so that I can know what's affordable for you, but at the same time willing to pay for it? So there are all of these different types of things that you could do. Ultimately, you want to be able to train models to behave in a particular way and not behave in a particular manner. You don't necessarily want to tell people, why don't you take a bite into a ghost pepper and take a fork, put it in a plug. This is something I just read in one of the papers from an amazing research group. The whole idea is that you don't want to get into the spaces of what is harmful. How exactly do you provide insights into this one? From a Gen AI perspective, you can say, hey, if you stick a fork into a plug, it can probably explain to you all the things that's going to happen. How do you instill common sense into any of those things? So we are working very closely in management and banking and insurance claims, any of the client engineering tasks across any of the retail industries or any one of those things. How do we help? Using federated learning, is there something that I can learn from, let's say, Home Depot, and Lowe's benefit from the learnings that Home Depot has, right? More of a federated way of learning about each other, what's best for the consumers in the end. We are in that particular space where we recognize your intellectual property and what's important for you and what you're willing to share with the society at large, and we're developing solutions in that particular space to help transform them.
That's exciting, which is where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly.
And what you're saying is where the rubber meets the road is where pollutants also get created. We have to be careful.
Yeah.
How can we reduce that? So thank you for shedding light on that.
If I could add one more thing, for any company, including IBM, the most expensive part of running the company is human intellect. Associated with that is whatever infrastructure that you may need with it, right? And for many companies, that is their intellectual property. Who did we manage to hire, and what kind of infrastructure did we provide for these people? And this particular combination, can it create the right ecosystem for them? And how do we protect it? It's very easy for somebody else to do all the hard work. You jump in and say, thank you for doing all this hard work. Can I reap the benefits from it? Everyone should be able to reap the benefits as long as they're contributing back. It's like paid forward. So some of these capabilities that Google is providing, OpenAI is providing, or Bing, or any of these companies are providing, are benefits that you want to reap, but you want to be able to pay forward as well. And that is the human in everyone. You want to figure out how best to contribute back. We are in that process where we have learnings and we want to help business partners and industry so that we can have a pretty acceptable society at large.
That's true. So it's the shared economy of learning and the shared economy of contributing. Now, speaking of human capital and the fact that at the end of the day, a lot of it is people, a lot of super bright engineers, one of who introduced me to you. They're not necessarily the most diplomatic. They're not necessarily the most easy to deal with. They have naturally honed such superb skills. They do have well-developed egos. And also they can tend to be very much siloed because they're specialized. What are the soft skills required in managing teams of super bright people? Do we need soft skills in managing AI or AI systems? Likewise, because they're also supervised, almost idiot savants, like all these little AIs in different silos. What kind of skills do you need?
You bet. It's kind of funny. I've been in research and working with researchers for nearly 30 years now. I've met some of the brightest minds. I get influenced, intimidated by smart people. For me, it's an honor to be in the same room, in the same platform as some of these people. it gives me immense satisfaction to be able to have this conversation. When I first entered IBM Research, right as I entered the lobby, I ran into John Backus. And John Backus is, of course, the father of Fortran. I've known him more from the automata theory in terms of BNF. Backus norm for me is the fundamental representation of what we think logically. And when I ran into him, I couldn't believe that I was that close to him. And B, I was in the same building that he works in. That gave me an unbelievable pleasure. Then I met Raymond Lurie, who is the father of GML, which was a precursor to HTML. And I can tell you some really good stories about him. He grew up in Belgium in a printing press. His father owned a printing press. So he kind of grew up typesetting. That was his thing. And when he started working in computers and he saw everything being green font everywhere and no formatting, he thought that there was a need to create a markup language to help improve the readability of content. I ran into Dick Casey, Richard Casey, who was one of the pioneers in handwriting recognition. Takahashi, who was one of the first neural network implementers of classifiers. Then Roger Haskin, Rakesh Agarwal. I can go through the list. Some of the most amazing people that I got an opportunity to work with. Each one of them have expertise in different domains, and each one of them has their own way of thinking, their way of analyzing. And while it may be very difficult to do this, for me, because I respected everyone, it was okay for me to find people with attitudes. It was okay for me where I had to deal with people who have a big ego. But I also knew from a broader sense that your ego and your capabilities are limited to your domain. And the world's much larger than that. And it was one of those understandings that one needs to have, that this person has invested a significant amount of their life learning this particular domain, and they have a good understanding of the domain, and you have to respect that. And ditto with other people. As long as you're respecting all of these people with that one, and if you can teach them the benefits of integration, this is the example that I was giving about the pearls and the necklaces. And if they understand that the value of a pearl could be X dollars, and the value of cumulative pearls as a necklace is going to be a lot more than individual costs of each one of these pearls, the people see the benefits of it. Nobody is so thick that they're going to find it very difficult to understand and explore the integration of different components to create a better value.
And how about AI itself? There are different AI systems today. Do you think they have or will start developing egos that we'll have to deal with?
So, yeah, I think so. If you take a look at AI, it's a very broad generalization of the various types of architectures that one could have in solving problems. Paying attention to the person who is speaking helps in terms of understanding and respecting the other person quite a bit. Ditto with AI systems. If you can pay attention to how the systems are learning and architecting themselves, you can help improve those quite a bit. While we have a generalized view of AI in terms of decode assistance or the decode assistance and whatnot, it's a very complex domain with lots of architectures and lots of domains. I'll give you a very simple example. If you take a look at OpenAI, ChatGPT or any one of those things, and if you start looking into the details of the context length which they use to learn, let's take a very simple example of 8K or 32K context. If you take 8K context, you're talking about documents which have about 4,000 to 6,000 words. But if you look at the documents and the document distribution from which they're learning, they don't necessarily start with those. You have got documents which are 50 words, 100 words, and so on. And they're not discarding any of this. They want to use all of this data. If you want to use all of this data, is it possible for you to group them into similar topics so that when your language model is learning, it's learning from the broader context of the combination of all of these documents? Because you're not necessarily learning everything from textbooks or novels or literature, where you do have very large documents. You've got 10,000, 30,000, 300,000 word documents, but you're not necessarily learning from that. Can you combine and create this thing so you can help advance AI significantly by understanding domains and understanding topics? Can I group together all my reasoning challenges and documents into one so that the model can learn better? One area that AI models struggle right now is with reasoning. And it's very, very hard for a computer to reason, especially when it has diverse ways of solving those particular problems. Again, I think we're scratching the surface here, but the new architectures and the new ways of learning is going to continue to evolve. People do have this notion that, hey, I have the best way of understanding tables and table extraction and whatnot. Way back in 1999 and 2000, I was working with a company in San Jose, which was creating data sheets for semiconductor components. Everything used to be in a data sheet. They used to be printed. There were tables with all the components and there's properties and everything else. If you wanted to purchase some components for semiconductors, you had to go sit there, go through all of these data sheets and find them. Converting that from print with really pretty formats to a computer where you can do a component-based search by the different properties that you want was a very difficult problem. So you could have an ego saying that, hey, I understand semiconductors and their properties and I can create a solution for you. But if I were to say, hey, can I take you and put you in construction and can you come up with the same thing in terms of the size and the tensile strength and the various properties that I need to have for the nuts and bolts for a bridge? You should be able to transfer your knowledge from one domain to another knowledge easily. And that's really where AI is going to play a role in terms of learning from one domain and being able to apply to a different domain as well. Individual egos set aside, because you could potentially create similar kind of egos. But some of the behavior patterns of the models is going to be driven primarily by legal consciousness of the various people. Like I've known this for a fact. People like to keep their medical history private for a long period of time. But if they're in terminal care, they have to worry about it. They're willing to give up everything about their information so that they could help the future generation. So privacy out the window because now they see a much shorter life left. Is there a way where you can preserve the privacy of the people, get the data so that we can help the society at large? That would help tremendously in terms of what we could possibly be doing. I understand people's concern about privacy and what is society going to talk about X, Y, or Z, but the net benefits of being open outweigh those who want to protect the privacy for whatever other reasons that they have.
You covered a lot of ground. And you reminded me of those data sheets, the headaches they gave me, they're getting much thicker eyeglasses. And now that I don't read data sheets, I don't need glasses as much. So
no, but the parametric search was something that was manual. Somebody had to sit down and
oh my God, yes, yes.
So from a computer perspective, it's pretty easy. I want to filter by this parameters, this parameters, this parameter, it's there, right?
Yeah, like relational databases. It's like in chess, Kasparov, I think, was famously known as saying the person who can see 10 steps ahead is far ahead of the one who can see 3 steps. The computer with a lot of data and a lot of capacity can look 100 steps ahead and has a huge advantage. So what's going to be the role of humans? There's a lot of fear out there saying that computers are going to do everything and we won't have any jobs. But you are in the guts of AI day in and day out for quite some time.
I think we need to break this down into cycles. I would probably start with education. One of the biggest concerns people had with ChatGPT is, oh my God, it can write essays and my kids are just going to use this way to generate an essay and what are they going to learn in school? This fear is new, but it's not new if you go back to when the search engines were there. Oh, people can just go and search for this answers on Google. So what has been the progress since we were kids and you could find information in a library book to you finding information on Google or find similar information from ChatGPT? It's an evolution. So we see that evolving. If you did not have the books in a library, you would have had to travel from one place to another place to gather information. So we're speeding up access to information. And as you're speeding up access to information, how can this help you become better students, better teachers, better schools, better universities? We all traveled to this country for better education. Now you have got these toolings that are going to help you with better education. So the way I see it is that evolution, like if you're looking at schooling, if you look at construction, if you look at material discovery, if you start looking at wealth management, if you were to take a very simple example, which is a very difficult one right now. If you say that, hey, there's going to be a new Biden policy, which is going to tax companies that are going to buy back stock, suddenly you start seeing that, hey, companies cannot buy back stock. So the valuation of the stock may go down because now companies are worried about it. Or you could say that, okay, instead, the companies, because they have excess cash, may give out more dividends to the shareholders so that they can retain the shareholders. If that is the case, then your wealth manager should say, like, hey, buy in all of those mutual funds which invest in dividend stocks. So how do you correlate the policy, which is unrelated, which wants to tax companies which buy back stock, with mutual fund owners who invest in dividend stocks, to consumers who want to invest in either companies that buy back stock or get dividend income? So that's a very complex area. Traditionally, and most of the wealth management companies are still heavily dependent upon systems based on data warehouses, and they generate reports once a quarter about how S&P is doing, how Dow is doing, or how the semiconductor industry is doing, or any of these things, right? Pharmaceutical companies, blah, blah, blah. But we are at a point where we can break the silos and get better information from any of these things. So I see that as the next progressive thing that's going to happen. So depending upon where your silo is, it could be a better understanding of data, better understanding of documents. Ultimately, it would have to be in helping people get better at what they do. Every person, the fear about farmers losing jobs when the tractors came out was significant. And every time there's a major leap in technology, like OpenAI has done, obviously it ruffles a lot of feathers, creates a lot of concern in people's minds, but ultimately it's only going to help us get better at what we do.
And speaking of things getting better, one of the things I'm noticing is that you can't have everything happening on the cloud and everything in the centralized place. You mentioned federated learning. So a lot of that learning may be happening on the edge, and somehow it has to be transferred back. And some of those could be bad habits like biases. They could be learning things that are unethical, or even like the dark web, doing things that are nefarious. What is the role of governance or policies in stabilizing these things and making sure that we go in a meaningful way?
This is a very good question. Human values in general shift over time. They're always evolving. You have data on the edge, which is biased or which has a lot of stigma. It could potentially cause a lot of problems. And it's topical in nature. We could look at data on the internet right now. If you start looking at people with physical disabilities or mental disabilities, while you want to learn about them and their conditions and how you can improve them, there's a lot of profanity associated with some of these things as well. If you look at women's health, and if you talk about gynecological problems associated with women, because of the plurality of the nature of the country that we are in, you end up seeing a lot of abuse from both sides of the spectrum associated with pregnancy, childbirth, and everything else associated with it. If you look at things like religion, people are very passionate about the community that they grew up in and the religion that they're associated with. And there could be an instance of terrorism that puts a really big black mark on that particular community. And that creates bias in the society, the stigma in the society. So how do we really frame any of these things so that we can solve the problem in the future? So bias and stigma are a huge problem in terms of how we want to solve this. There's indirect hate, there's direct hate, there's implicit hate. There's all of these different categories of information that we see. And all of these, we need to have guardrails against it. Let's take a very simple example. You have copyright information, then there is similarity matched information that you have to worry about. There's inspirational information that you want to think about. Before we started the call, we talked about Amir Khan. He tattoos his whole body because he has short-term memory, but loses long-term memory, but it was a copy of a Hollywood movie. And if you talk to the director, so I just had a dream about it, and he's not even inspired or anything like that, when in fact, it's almost an exact replica of a copy of it. So my point is that we could always be inspired by different types of content. It's nice to be able to say that, hey, I've written a murder mystery, but for my murder mystery, I was inspired by Agatha Christie's novel. I'm a huge fan of Peter Sellers. Growing up, Murder by Death was one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. It was a brilliant movie. We grew up with Hardy Boys, Blyton's novels and whatnot. So it would be very hard for us not to be inspired, and often something which is quote unquote copyrightable by somebody else, or it could be very similar to that. It's a matter of just acknowledging and being able to give the right citation So when we talk about federated learning, close association with that is just that. If I had a sensor, if I'm in a car, if I'm driving, and if my camera happens to capture someone who's drunk driving and has the license plate of it, and if you're informing someone that there's a drunk driver in front of it, or is it just that, like, hey, someone was just shifting lanes and I recognized it, said it's drunk driving, and now I'm going to be careful with every white Ford Explorer that's on the road. I mean, you don't want to come to those kind of conclusions. And in order to stop making hard decisions in that, we need to evolve as humans continuously. And our value system has to change. And the classification that you see today may change tomorrow. And we need our systems to evolve so that they can be aligned to perform better from that perspective. We do that as humans. The moment we learn more about certain things, our notion of bias and stigma changes, and we are very, very good. And we want our AI systems to also do that. And that's really where I see the progress happening in this space.
So, Sandeep, one of the things you mentioned was how AI is already breaking silos, making it possible to learn and crossbreed between different domains. Is there a possibility that all the technologies that are now getting into these AI-based platforms, will they help or hurt in democratizing education, in democratizing making trainings, education available to many more people?
Depending upon the technology, depending upon what it has with respect to bias and stigma, the whole notion of having a library was to democratize information availability to people. This is going back to the good old days of gathering information. You literally had to go back. But just because a library exists didn't necessarily mean that everyone had access to all the information. You still needed to go through all the index cards, try to find the author or the book or the textbook. You needed a librarian to help you find the book and everything else that was there. We managed to overcome that by indexing a lot of this information on the computer and getting access to it. So for me, the best example that I can think of is that one of the professors in MIT took one of the linear algebra classes and just put it on the web. Anyone could do this. And they were looking at who are the people who are accessing this class and how are they solving the problems associated with it. Pretty soon, what they noticed is that there was a community in China, there was a community in India, there was a community in Latin America that were all understanding the lecture, trying to solve the problem, and they were creating solutions of the problem with their understanding and thinking of those things associated with that. What this leads to is an accelerated pace with which people learn. Also, a way for different people across different countries who don't even speak the same language to come together and solve a problem that may not have been solved yet. So we are getting into a space where access to information is helping people understand the information and also be able to challenge them in ways that we haven't seen them challenge across the silos to help solve problems that have not been solved yet. It's not like just because you have ChatGPT, you can take a kid from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, or someplace, and have them build bridges in San Francisco. It's not going to happen right away, but it's going to help advance your knowledge in such a way that that's what you want to do in life. It can help you move towards that particular goal of yours. So yes, the notion of traditional libraries has now become the internet, and over the internet now you've got more educational chat-based tooling, which helps you converse and get answers in a better way. But you still need to reason with it and validate it, moderate it, so that you become better.
And speaking about learning, a few months ago, a friend of mine took me to a farm where there are 250 fruit trees, and I thought he's such an amazing farmer. I thought I was looking at apples in your background. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
So this is rather interesting. We just talked about federated learning and how do we toggle between that. Growing up, my dad was the president of Friends of the Trees. His role was to try and protect as many of the trees as they could, especially the big trees. So he started giving people incentives like 50 rupees or 100 rupees just not to cut down the trees. at the same time, he used to grow various types of fruit trees in our own home because he wanted us to enjoy these different fruit trees. He used to get up at 5 every day in the morning to take care of his trees and everything else. And we had everything from the chiku to the papayas to the coconuts to the most rarest of the fruit trees that typically you couldn't get them easily in the marketplace. I kind of was very passionate about as a kid, but as a taster, someone who was enjoying these things. Life takes you in different ways. Like when you're in school most of the time, you're working, studying, trying to be something. I happened to have an opportunity to go to Germany for a year. Rather than living in the big cities in a hotel, I decided to rent a home in a faraway town from the city just to see and experience the German lifestyle. And it just so happened that everyone in that little town had some sort of an orchard. And it was the most beautiful thing. They used to have weekly get-togethers. People would share and talk about what they're growing. And I really, really like that part of it. In Silicon Valley, we are so tied up with the next generation of what's next in computers and silicon. And there's always that talk that I felt that even though the Bay Area in particular was so rich with soil and legacy of fruits and everything else, that people were going away from it. Coming back from Germany, I thought it would be kind of nice to have a place where I could grow some of these things so that the kids can enjoy what a fresh fruit tastes like. Right? I mean, not just go to a store and pick up an apple that is completely waxed and shining and readily available and not necessarily being as tasteful. So my goal was hey, can I have an orchard of sorts, grow some fruits, let people experience it and enjoy it, make it into a social thing, invite a lot of people into our home. So this person you're talking to is me. And I've invested quite a bit of time and effort in trying to bring some of the rarest fruits into my orchard, to bring in those things. While I do have 16 varieties of apples, what you're seeing in my background are cherries. These are the sour cherries, English morello cherries, and something that I absolutely love. You can make cherry pies with it, but I've used it as a way to substitute mangoes in the Indian pickles. They end up being a really good substitute for mangoes in the pickles. Absolutely, absolutely wonderful in that one. My heart gets super overwhelmed and happy when people come over and enjoy and they talk about their childhood and how they enjoyed the fruits. I had a friend of mine from England and I have an English pear. Not a very big fruit, it's small fruit. He came over and he took a bite of it and he almost started crying. He was talking about his childhood memories of having these pears. He asked if he could take some of this and I said, please feel free. And he took 200 pears that year. It's one of those things that it just reminded him of his childhood and takes him to a happy place. So the whole idea behind having all of these fruit trees and everything else is that can I get people into a happy place? Can they really go and remember something from their childhood or something that made them extremely happy? My home was even featured in the Festival of Fruit. And we had people from all over the country visiting and enjoying the fruits and everything else. It's really one of those things where I really open it up for all my family and friends to come in, enjoy, pick the fruit, take it home, and really talk about the different varieties. Most of these fruit, by the way, you don't typically end up getting in stores because of the size or the shelf life. The kind of fruits that you end up getting in stores are much bigger, heavier, and things that last a little longer. The fruits that I have typically tend to have a much shorter shelf life, but that's really when you want to enjoy them.
Yes, that's how you and I got to know each other. And now I'm realizing you're using the principles of AI even here, taking fruits from one domain, what is it, the Morello cherries, and making Indian pickles out of it and substituting raw mangoes versus cherries. So may you continue to do all these amazing things and hopefully we'll be able to get AI to improve the quality of fruits and vegetables and even have biodiversity. Is there any work going on in ecology and biodiversity with artificial intelligence?
So there are multiple things. So there's a lot one can learn from farmers. I try to keep all my fruit trees organic. In order to keep these trees organic, you need to have an ecosystem that supports it. So for example, I have planted about 400 rose plants around my home. And the rose plants tend to be very hardy, and the aphids get attracted to the rose plants so they can leave the fruit trees alone. Leaving the fruit trees alone is not enough because the aphids can jump to the fruit trees as well. So you need an ecosystem like the ladybugs who can eat the aphids on that particular tree. You need to attract the bees. How can we have enough bees to pollinate, do all of this stuff? So there is much more to the ecosystem than that. A lot of the bugs the fruits tend to have get carried by things with legs. They kind of crawl up the trunk. They end up carrying bugs and everything else in the fruit tree. So I have this thing called tanglefoot. The whole idea is that kind of keep the little bugs that crawl up the tree away from the fruits. So for majority of the fruit, I don't want to ever say that it's 100%. You should be able to just pick from the plant, just bite into it without having to worry about any pesticides, worrying about any bugs or anything in it. If I do a good enough job of protecting the fruits are super awesome. There are challenges that come with trying to keep everything organic as well, in terms of sometimes you don't necessarily see the virus that hits the tree. You end up losing those trees as well. The whole thing is that there's a lot of learnings. The learnings from the farmers and what they have been doing for centuries to protect their farms, to what can we do now? I mean, we come from a tropical country. We have a lot of neem. My dad had neem trees in his home. Neem oil happens to be one of those which really is an organic way of protecting a lot of the fruit trees. I use neem oil as well to protect our plants. But it's experimental. We're still learning in terms of, can we use neem oil as a way to prevent peach cold, which is a big problem right now in this valley. But how do you really tie it in with the kind of climate that we have? How much water do they need? What kind of sun and exposure do they need? I kind of try to grow each one of my plants to look like a funnel or a wine glass so that they get the most amount of sunlight. I don't need a lot of fruit. We prune out a lot of the fruit. What are you going to do with excess fruit? We kind of give it away to Village Harvest, and they come and they distribute it in churches and everything else. But there's a limited amount of stuff that we can do with excess fruit. So I try to limit the amount of fruit so that we can create good quality fruit that people can enjoy. Once you have the fruits, we do everything from jams and jellies to baking goods to liqueurs to everything else so that we can enjoy throughout the year. Ice creams.
Wow, this is an exciting journey, and I'll have to make my way back to your home again. Last time I picked 100 fruits, and maybe I'll have to get tips to make sure that we grow fruits the right way.
Absolutely.
We are already hitting some of those issues that you talked about. Well, this is the reason I talk to people. And Sandeep, it's a joy talking to you. But to people listening out there, yes, we are all human beings with many different interests, not just technology, not just the implications of technology, but how our life can be integrated into one whole to be able to bring the wisdom that we learn from one domain into another. So please come forward. I would love to hear your stories. I would love to see how you apply some of the things you've learned in technology in your day-to-day life and vice versa. Sandeep, thanks again. And yes, I'll find my way to your farms. It's good to know that you're farming and bringing that learning into technology in a bidirectional fashion.
My pleasure. Thank you. And look forward to having you and your family over.